I must tell you that I was once giving a lecture in upstate New York. And I went into the barber shop in the afternoon of the town, and I got a haircut. The barber did not recognize me, and he said, "Are you going to that lecture tonight by Archbishop Sheen?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have a ticket?" I said, "No, I don't." Well, he said, "All the tickets have been sold, so you probably will have to stand." I said, "You know, it's a peculiar thing that every time I go to hear that man talk, I always have to stand."
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 42. This week we are going to be covering one of my favorite topics to discuss. And it's one that causes a ton of controversy anytime I bring it up on my social media platforms. And that is the topic of judgment. On the one hand, you have people who tell us that we may never ever judge. And those are usually the people who come on to judge me. And then we have people who are judging people to hell and just judging motives completely and judging people's souls. And neither one of those is right. And so the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And I think it's such an interesting topic to talk about because we all judge. We all do. None of us are free from doing that. And yet judgment is seen as a completely dirty word. But yeah, we all do it. And in some respects, we have to do it. We have to make judgment calls. We have to make moral judgment calls. We have to call people out on things if they're doing something incredibly sinful. It's right and just to call people out. But I've found that when you try to explain that online, somewhere that gets lost in translation. And basically all it comes out as judge everybody to hell, judge everybody's soul to hell, which is not what I'm saying. In fact, that's exactly what we cannot do. That is reserved for God alone, the state of our soul after death. So anyway, today's reading is called How We Judge Anything, and the 3 key points are truth, moral issues, influences. Number 42, how we judge anything. It is quite easy to calculate what will be the judgment of different groups of people on any moral issue which attracts public attention, such as betraying the government, using a military or political post for self-aggrandizement, or stealing another man's wife. One can predict the reaction on any moral problem with amazing exactness. Little do people realize how much they reveal their own character by the judgment they make on these moral issues. The principle by which one predicts is the old Latin one, which rendered literally is, quote, whatever is received according to the manner of the one receiving it, unquote. If water is poured into a ditch, a glass, and a bonfire, the reaction will be quite different. So too, if a truth is poured into a mind that is sincere, a mind that is indifferent, and a mind that is evil, the reception will be quite different. Why is it that children who receive exactly the same education vary so much? It is because they have a disposition or pattern made up of their choices, decisions, and desires which makes them act as differently as stomachs receiving the same food. Actually, it's not so much the knowledge that people have which determines their reaction, but their behavior. Not the way they think, but the way they live. That is what our Lord meant when he said, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and doesn't come into the light lest his works be made known. But whoever does the truth comes to the light so his works may be revealed as wrought in God." John 3:20-21. Here is the reason for every assault against morality and truth. The flesh's way of thinking is hostile to God. Romans 8:7. Is it wrong for students to cheat, to break a sworn code? Your answer depends on whether you do evil or whether you do good. In the text, Christ charges the want of faith to immorality. Men prefer darkness, therefore they hate the light. No one hates the gospel so long as he keeps it, but when it rebukes his evil deeds, then he hates it. Those who murder do not believe in the fifth commandment. The wicked can endure the word so long as it does not gall their conscience and dig into their hearts. The drunkard does not cavil at a condemnation of hypocrisy, nor a profligate at a condemnation against avarice. The evil are in constant fear lest their actions be discovered to themselves, because that creates anxiety, guilt, and trouble. The truth robs men of the good opinion they had of themselves, so they are offended by it. A sluttish housemaid, when scolded at the untidiness of the room, said, "I am sure the rooms would be clean enough were it not for the sun, which is always showing the dirty places." The good man on his way home at night wants the street well lighted. The robber hates the light because it reveals his evil presence. Religion is loved or hated for the same reason. It all depends on what we are bent on, goodness or evil. There is a blindness which is a result of evil passion, which, if continued, can make us odious of all truth. Agnosticism is not an intellectual position, but a moral position, or better still, an intellectual defense for a life which is afraid of the light. He, however, who lives the truth has new horizons of truth constantly opening up before him. There are many who like to boast that they are looking for the truth, but they drop dead if they ever found it. They like to knock at its door, but they do not want the door opened because truth creates responsibilities. Truth is not only objective, but subjective. It is objective because it is independent of us. 2 + 2 makes 4, whether we like it or not. It is subjective when we are so possessed by it that we do not cheat our neighbor by adding 2 and 2 to make 3. As doctrine is the intellectual phase of divine truth, so obedience to it is its practical phase. Truth is not just something to be believed in, but to be acted out. Once we possess it, and it possesses us, we become something very different than we were before. The true life, therefore, is one which responds faithfully to all God's influences, and which says in its joy, "My soul waits on the Lord." Psalm 33:20. So, as you all know, I was raised Protestant, and I was also raised as a conservative. My dad and my mother are big conservatives. And so through much of my growing up years, Rush Limbaugh was always on the radio, especially when I was in the car with my dad. And so I grew up listening to Rush. And I continued to listen to him well into my 20s and even into my 30s. And I really looked to Rush Limbaugh to get a lot of truth from what was going on in the political world. I remember very distinctly one day, it wasn't too long after I became Catholic. I was driving down the highway in Virginia, and I was listening to Rush. I don't remember what he was talking about, but he made a comment about the Catholic Church, and he was wrong. He misrepresented the Catholic Church. I don't even remember what it was about. And in that moment, I thought to myself, wait a minute. He's not right about this. And I knew he wasn't, I'd been Catholic for a couple years. I'd been doing lots and lots of studying. And so I knew he was dead wrong. And I became very sad all of a sudden. I was very sad. And I turned off the radio and I just sat there and I was just kind of in shock because I had been listening to him for so long and he was such a trusted voice in my life that to finally hear him say something that I knew wasn't true was shocking. And so I decided to step away from listening to him for a while. And that's not to say that Russia's a bad person. God rest his soul. It's not to say that he spoke untruth all the time or anything like that. This was just an awakening moment for me. I wanted to take a step back because it was really the first time when somebody I had really trusted for truth didn't offer it. And I didn't quite know what to do with that. And so I did. I took a step back. I stopped listening to Rush. I stopped listening to quite a few conservative commentators. And I just kind of wanted to sit with my own thoughts for a while. And I wanted to think about it. I wanted to think about what this meant for my life. And there's something that I discovered. And it's what Bishop Sheen says here at the very beginning of our readings. He says, "It is quite easy to calculate what will be the judgment of different groups of people on any moral issue which attracts public attention." And then he goes on from there. "One can predict the reaction on any moral problem with amazing exactness." And that was something that I realized during kind of my time away. I kind of detoxed from news kind of altogether for a good period of time. This is what I came to realize, is that I could pretty much predict on any moral issue or any political issue what either side of the aisle was going to say based off of the issue. And I could almost predict it with amazing exactness, just like Bishop Sheen says. And so what this helped me to understand is that, for one, we look to our political parties as the beacons of truth in everything. If you are a conservative, you tend to look to the Republican Party as telling you the truth all the time. And if you are a Democrat, or a liberal, you tend to look to the Democrat Party to tell you the truth all the time. And there is like no in the middle. I know there are like 5 independents in the world, but nobody meets in the middle. There's hardly ever anybody that says, okay, we've just been presented with this situation. Let's see how things play out. I was just talking to my daughter about this last night. I was telling her about how after the George Floyd incident went down, everybody took to their sides. And you could pretty much determine what the sides were going to say based off of the situation. And very few of us on social media were saying, let's just hold on. Let's just hold on and see what comes of this. This is really heated. We've got both sides coming at us, telling us what we should believe. We don't have all the facts. We weren't there. We're only getting a snippet of the video. Let's just see. It could totally be a racist thing, or it could totally not be. It could be something else. But can we just halt with the judgment calls for right now? Woo, boy, that was not a popular thing to say. And I really got taken to task over that. And all I was saying was, let's just see what happens. We don't know yet. Let's not make judgment calls 5 minutes after we've been shown a snippet of a video. But that was wildly unpopular, and I got called lots of names, and I got taken to task. And that's fine. That's fine. But this is what I learned during that time when I stepped away from news, is that so often we rush to make judgments based off of what political side we are on. And we just go along with whatever our side, quote unquote, tells us to believe. And we kind of stop thinking for ourselves. and we don't take time to let information come in, and we don't take time to really find out what the truth is, because we want to be on our side. We want to be with our tribe. We don't want to be cast out of our tribe at all. And so we will go along with what they are saying so that we can stay within our tribe. But that's not what we should be doing. We should be seeking the truth, no matter how it makes us feel. Even Bishop Sheen says, whoever who lives the truth has new horizons of truth constantly opening up before him. And that's true. If we are really actively seeking the truth, and we're trying to think for ourselves, and we're trying to pray and look for, answers from God, and we're trying to be prudent, and we're trying to be discerning, and we're really seeking the truth, then even more truth will be opened up for us. But during that time when I stepped away, this is something that I really learned, is that we do not seek God as the one who holds all truth first. We always tend to seek leaders of our political party and those within, our camp. So just something to be mindful of. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is down on page 148. He says, "So too, if a truth is poured into a mind that is sincere, a mind that is indifferent, and a mind that is evil, the reception will be quite different." So I was writing about Christopher Columbus the other day, and I have done a decent amount of research on Christopher Columbus. I'm no scholar, I don't claim to be, but he interests me. He interests me a lot, and I have read several pieces of his actual writing, which reveals a ton. And I always encourage people to read primary sources because they will give you an insight that you just can't get from other people commenting on their works. So anyway, I've read several of his primary sources, his own writings, letters that he wrote to people. One in particular is so interesting. It's when he came over the first time, he wrote a letter to a colleague, a friend, describing that experience. And it's so different than what we are fed in our modern day culture about Christopher Columbus. Anyway, I was writing about him and, giving my thoughts. I don't think Christopher Columbus was a saint. I don't think anybody's advocating for that. Maybe they are, but I do think he had some sins, some major sins, as do most of us. He was a devout Catholic. He did want to spread the gospel. He was a very courageous and brave sailor, explorer. He wasn't the greatest governor in the world. He wasn't able to keep people under control and keep them from, doing bad things to the natives that were on the islands that he was visiting. And so, he just wasn't great at everything. And I don't think that takes away necessarily from the fact that he was an amazing explorer. Anyway, this is getting beside the point, but I was really ready for a lot of tomatoes thrown at me for this post, because Christopher Columbus is not so popular in this day and age. In fact, it's more popular to treat him as a villain than any kind of a hero. But it was very well received. What I wrote was very well received. However, I did get one lady who came on and she was not happy with what I wrote. And she accused me of only seeing his life through the lens of being a Catholic. And she said I was completely biased and, I was being too religious about the issue. And so I couldn't give a clear, concise message about him because of my biases. To which I could say the same thing about her. She was obviously coming from a point where she didn't want to believe that Columbus was a good person in any respect. And, I asked her, I was like, so, what primary resources have you read from Christopher Columbus or people that knew him that lead you to believe that he actually is a villain? And we had this back and forth, and she couldn't answer my question, and she eventually just left. This is an example of what we just read from Bishop Sheen. if truth is poured into a mind that is sincere, and when studying Christopher Columbus, I have wanted to have a sincere mind about him. I knew he wasn't a perfect man, and I'm not claiming that he's a perfect man, but I would like to understand him and the times better. And so I have come at it with a sincere mind to just discover the truth. But truth that's poured into a mind that is indifferent, the results are going to be different. With somebody who's indifferent and just doesn't care, say, about Christopher Columbus, they don't care either way. But then a mind that is evil, or a mind that is bent towards seeing evil, truth poured into it will be received in a very different way. She wanted to see Christopher Columbus in a very evil light. And so there was nothing that I could say, even when I acknowledged that he had done things that weren't right. And I never claimed he was a saint. I said, he definitely had flaws and shortcomings and sins in his life. But he also did some really great things. She couldn't hear any of that. She couldn't hear any of that and could not accept any of it because she really wanted to see him in the modern day lens and judge him in the court that we judge nearly every historical person in now, which is the modern day lens, which is really quite sad. The point I'm trying to make here is that everybody in the world has biases of some kind. There's not a single person who doesn't. We all have them, and we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to get things wrong, and we're going to be jaded by certain things. But I think if you approach any subject that you're trying to learn the truth on with an open and sincere mind, God will lead you to the truth. And that will be very rewarding. One way or another, it will be very rewarding. Either you'll stop believing in something that you shouldn't, or you'll discover some really amazing things, and it'll lead you further on down the path of truth, and you'll just gain more and more truth like we talked about earlier. So let's continue on to the next page. On page 150, he says, religion is loved or hated for the same reason. It all depends on what we are bent on, goodness or evil. There is a blindness which is a result of evil passion, which, if continued, can make us odious of all truth. Agnosticism is not an intellectual position, but a moral position, or better still, an intellectual defense for a life which is afraid of the light. I thought this was really key because we see a lot of people claiming today that they're agnostic, or they just don't know, about God. We have a lot of people claiming that they're atheists. But there is a way to know the truth. And again, we have to have a sincere mind to discover it. The interesting thing about agnostics is that they say they don't know. I don't know if there's a God or not. There might be, there might not be. I just don't have enough evidence one way or the other. But they never live as if God might be real. If there was a chance, if you were unsure that, God is real or not, most agnostics all live a very atheistic life. Honestly, I have never seen one live a life where they are like trying to follow God and trying to really seek him and living in such a way that they believe there might be a possibility that there is God. And I think agnosticism is like an intellectual defense. They don't want to come right out and say it just in case, but they're not really interested in living their life as if there might be a God. And so they tip towards atheism in reality. And so just to sum up here at the end, we all make judgment calls. We all have to find the truth. We all have things presented in front of us, and we have to decide what we are going to pick or which path we're going to go down. And we have to make judgment calls based on the information that we have. And so the best thing to do is to gain as much information as possible, have that open and sincere mind, be willing to discover what the truth is. A lot of people say, like Bishop Sheen says, oh yeah, they say they love the truth and they're always seeking the truth, but they would drop dead if they actually heard the truth because they aren't really that interested. They just want to sound intellectual. So have an open, sincere mind, be willing to hear the truth and discover it, and then be willing to act upon it, to live in such a way that shows that you believe this truth. And give it some time. If you're unsure about something, if there's something in the world, in the news, in the media, on social media, and you don't know yet what the truth is, give it some time. You don't have to follow what your political party is saying. You can take it to prayer and talk to God about it, and open up scripture and maybe find something that relates to that in some way. And take your time on making a judgment call. And I think if you do those things, you will find that with any moral issue, you can find the truth. You really can. And if we let the Catholic Church and Scripture, and our good Catholic teachers be our primary influences, I think we will be on a better path to finding the truth on any issue, really, if we just keep our mind and our hearts focused on Christ and on his church and what it has to say. So that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 43. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.